Muted.
Good afternoon. My name is Jen Saunders. I'm a Senior Program Officer with the National Alliance to End Homelessness. My colleague Sharon McDonald and I would like to welcome you to our webinar series on rapid rehousing. We're so delighted today to have our speakers addressing how Jacksonville, Florida has been able to transform its homeless system. So a quick agenda for the webinar. I'll sort of start off by giving a really brief overview of rapid rehousing, which I imagine most everyone on the webinar is familiar with. Dawn Gilman, the Chief Executive Officer of Changing Homelessness, and Will Evans, Vice President of Housing and Supportive Services, Community Connections, will discuss how Jacksonville has transformed its homeless service system by reallocating transitional housing to rapid rehousing. We will have some time for Q&A following the presentations. And just a few housekeeping items. The audio and slides will be posted on our website following the event. And there is a questions box on the webinar. If you have questions that you'd like to post at the end of the session, please feel free to post those to us at any time during the webinar. So a brief overview of rapid rehousing. Most of you are already familiar with this, but it's an intervention designed to help individuals and families quickly exit homelessness and return to permanent housing. It's offered without preconditions, and the resources and services provided are typically tailored to the unique needs of the household. The core components of rapid rehousing include housing identification, rent and move-in assistance or financial assistance, and rapid rehousing, case management, and services. While a rapid rehousing program must have all three core components available, it's not required that a single program provide these or that a participant utilize all three of these components. We also think it's important to take a broader view and look at how rapid rehousing can transform a homeless system, for example, by reducing wait lists for shelter and capacity demand. And the role of transitional housing in a homeless system is also shifting, and we'll hear more about that from our presenters today. I just wanted to make people aware of the previous webinars that we've had on rapid rehousing. I'll also mention a few that are upcoming at the end of the webinar series. You can find all of these at our website, endhomelessness.org. So with that, I will turn it over to Dawn.
Great, and good morning or good afternoon, everybody. My name is Dawn Gilman, and I am the CEO of Changing Homelessness. Just to give you a little bit of context, my agency is a 501c3 operating in Duval, Clay, and Nassau counties in Florida, so we're in the northeast corner of the state. What I'm going to present today is how our continuum became an early adopter of rapid rehousing, where our rapid rehousing is funded, and what the unmet needs continue to be for this intervention. But before I dive into that, I want to explain the why. Why have we made so many changes when it really would have been a lot easier to keep things as status quo? And the why is we are committed to ending homelessness, and we need rapid rehousing to get there. So let's start with my perspective on who we are. We are a universal applicant, an SSVF grantee, database manager, and a lead entity. So if you can advance to the next slide on how did we increase our rapid rehousing. There we go. So the three main funding sources in our community for rapid rehousing are the Continuum of Care funding, Supportive Services for Veteran Family, and the Emergency Solutions Grant. Our first foray into rapid rehousing was in the 2012 NOFA, where we had funding that we allocated to a small pilot. This was the same year we were able to allocate some HMIS staff position for coordinated intake and repurpose an SSO grant for coordinated intake. So a lot of things were happening in that year. Between the 2012 and 2013 competitions, we had the National Alliance come in for an performance improvement clinic, and at this clinic, the CEO of Community Connections saw the value in rapid rehousing versus scattered site transitional housing, and in the 2013 NOFA, we reallocated 2 large scattered site housing programs into 1 large rapid rehousing program for families with minor children. In the 2014 NOFA, we added a small program specifically for victims of domestic violence. And in this past NOFA, which I just checked and we don't have a yes or no on yet, we allocated 60% of our bonus amount to rapid rehousing for single persons, as well as persons with families. I believe probably everybody on the line is familiar with supportive services for veteran families. We are in our 4th year of our SSVF award. We are the lead grantee, and it does cover all 3 counties within our continuum. Emergency Solutions is, this grant is probably our weak spot. We can, our community partners can access funding through both the city of Jacksonville and the state for 2 of our counties, but neither of these entities contract in a way that allows for a full year or multiple years of a program. So if you can advance to the next slide. This is going to give you just kind of a breakout of what has changed. So if you look from 2014 to 2015, in 2014 this is straight from our HIC. So we had no rapid rehousing on that 4th Wednesday in January in 2014. The following year, it was up to 570. I believe when we will turn it in this year, it is going to more than double because of the volume of FSVF and the COC-funded rapid rehousing. The other thing I'd really like to point out on this slide is in 2014, most of our housing inventory was not in permanent housing. We had a lot in transitional housing and an emergency shelter. So this slide is starting to show you the shift to permanent housing, as well as that increase in rapid rehousing in our mix of housing interventions. And if you can move to the next slide. This is a visual of the change in homelessness over time from our point-in-time count. And this gives you, from 2009 to 2015, you see there's been about a 25% decrease in overall homelessness. And you can see that those slices of pie have shifted somewhat. Now, we've made great progress in housing chronically homeless persons and veterans. But you can see in the 2015 slide, the piece that's all other homeless persons has expanded. It's more than doubled, where families with children continues to be close to 30% of our overall homeless population. So yeah, you can go on to the next slide. I'm going to talk to you about coordinated entry and how this has also influenced the community on where we need to put our dollars. We started coordinated entry in April of 2014. This is total number of intakes between then and the end of September of last year, which was just shy of 3,000. And we were averaging just over 152 unique households per month. But on the next slide, I'm going to give you a different way of looking at what happens on coordinated entry. This is broken down by the year 2014 versus 2015. So you can see that our average per month screen came close to tripling. If I had the numbers on the right hand side, I apologize, I don't. In 2014, we're seeing about 90 households per month. For last year, we were seeing over 180. The gap that you see is the difference between who we placed through coordinated intake and who is seeking housing assistance. So while we made great strides in that we increased our housing placement 6-fold, you can still see that there's a big gap between who was seeking housing services and who we were able to move into housing through coordinated intake. So if you move on to the next slide, what we just looked at was giving you a snapshot of how many people were seeking services. This is what did they need. In Northeast Florida, we use the VI SPDAT as our triage tool. So if you look at this slide, of those 3,000 different households that have been seeking our services, 50% of them are scoring in the rapid rehousing range. But if you look at the totals in that big red slice of pie, you see out of the 1,335 households, 320 were families. Right now, the overwhelming majority of our rapid rehousing funding is for families with minor children, for veterans, which gives our biggest unmet need currently is for rapid rehousing for adults who do not have minors in the household. This also happens to break out to about what the national averages are between the lightest touch, permanent supportive housing, and rapid rehousing. And if we can go on to the next slide. So this is just kind of how I summarize it. And homelessness is a solvable problem, but we do have to put the right tools and mix of interventions within our communities to get to that solution. So I believe that by collecting the data and being really transparent about who we are seeing was the reason that we put forward such a large proposal to HUD to do rapid rehousing for adults. I think the numbers are going to stay fairly consistent as we move forward, but we will keep watching them. But those monthly numbers are giving us a much better idea of what's really happening within our community and where we are really able to make a fairly substantial difference. And so with that, that is the end of my slide presentation. And that is my contact.
Will?
All right, thank you. Hi, my name is Will Evans, and I am the Vice President of Housing and Supported Services for Community Connections of Jacksonville. And what I'm going to do in my presentation is present to you on the side of the provider who actually did some transformations of being a provider of transitional housing to what we now do as a major provider of rapid rehousing in our community. Slide. As Don mentioned earlier, Community Connections in Jacksonville is located in Northeast Florida. We cover basically 3 counties, Duval, Nassau, and Clay County, which consists of a little bit over 1.2 million people. At one time, as in 2013 and 2014, excuse me, Community Connection was the largest provider of transitional housing. But in 2014, we started out with a pilot program and decided to experiment in the field of rapid rehousing. Slide, please. This is what we knew. As a provider, we're seeing that there was a shift from the philosophy of managing homelessness to actually ending homelessness. And we recognized that as a provider and as other providers in this homeless community that we did an excellent job of managing homelessness for years and years. And at some point we realized that we no longer want to manage homelessness. We want to try to end it. So we went through that methodology, that concept to say, okay, what can we do in order to make this concept come true? So what we did was we looked at some of the transitional housing program. What we knew was that the typical or the average length of time that a person or a family stayed in transitional housing ranged anywhere between 14 months to 2 years. We also knew that participants who entered the transitional housing program from other programs, especially like shelter, was adding to the length of homelessness and creating a layer of homelessness. As you know, if someone became homeless, they would normally go to a emergency shelter, then an emergency shelter would transform them to a transitional housing program, and from the transitional housing program, then we will make means for them to go into permanent housing. Well, you can see that's a 3-layer process. So we thought about what can we do to actually shorten the length of time that a person remains homeless. Also, we knew that about 1/3 of the transitional housing participants who left our program left for something other than permanent housing. But one of the most important things that we found out, and this was basically through data, is that the average cost per exit for families with children in our transitional housing program was about $18,500, close to $19,000. And through our pilot program, which Don mentioned earlier, we realized that we was able to provide the services to families in the rapid rehousing format for about half that cost. Slide, please. So this is what we implemented. First of all, we started out getting some technical assistance. We actually asked the National Alliance to End Homelessness to come to our community and talk to us about how we could implement the rapid rehousing format. But before we can get our stakeholders to buy into this, we had to first go through a third party and say, okay, what can we sell this rapid rehousing? You know, how can we go by utilizing data to implement this program into our community? So the first thing we did was we asked for that technical assistance, and we actually did some data points based on our HPRP program and based on our current transitional housing program. And with that, we became close to some interesting facts that we were able to utilize rapid rehousing in our program to try to end homelessness. So we started out with a pilot program, a small pilot program, and that program basically was able to utilize and give us information on how we can go by expanding our rapid rehousing program. That retooling process for the community was a little difficult because, first of all, you had to get some feedback from the community within itself. And the best way to convince the feedback to do something or to change something that's been around for a number of years is to provide data. And we have a saying in our community that in God we trust, everybody else give data. So we took the data from the information and we provided the information to our stakeholders and saw that, hey, this might be something that we can invest our community with, and instead of going through the process of trying to manage homelessness, we can actually end it. So once we got approval from our stakeholders, once our CEOs came aboard, once our continuum came aboard and said, okay, let's go through the process of transforming how we did our services in the past to what we're doing in the future, which is rapid rehousing, we started with, first of all, rewriting all our job descriptions. Everyone had to, all our transitional housing case manager had to actually go through a reevaluation process. So we trained for about a whole year, and we trained basically first on the housing first model, because we knew that the families that come into the program, that was going to be the module behind it. We trained on progressive engagement model because as far as the financial assistance part of it, we knew that in order to provide assistance, we want to start out with a light touch and then provide the services as needed. And then luckily, during the same time that we started the rapid rehousing program, the coordinated entry and assessment program was also starting. So any referrals that we receive definitely would have to come through coordinated entry. It was a culture change for both participants, staff, stakeholders, and the community. But it was a culture change that definitely ended up in some results. Slide. And this is what we found out. Number one, change is a challenge. It was a difficult process, and not everyone is apt for change. But based on information we provided, based on the data we presented, and based on the concept of that we were going through the methodology of not just wanting to manage homelessness, but end homelessness, things started to come aboard. Everybody started to come aboard with going through that change. The first year of the program, we just actually completed our first year of the program this past December. We served over 136 families and a total of 388 clients. The housing placement average from the time we received a referral to the time we actually placed the family was anywhere between 42 and 48 days. Now our goal is to get that down to 30 days or less, but we have found and figured out some ways that we can actually go through that process. The assessment tools is excellent as a means of measuring your rapid rehousing program. And basically, one of the most important things that we found out is that people with no income can be housed. I think through several conferences that I've attended and any presentation that I did, one of the biggest questions I was asked is, how do you house people with no income? Well, the data shows that our first year, that we was able to house most of the 90% of our clients. And so, and out of that 98% of those clients that was housed, about at least 30% of them came in with no income. And we had very little trouble with being able to house them. But the tool that we used in order to make sure that it was able to house is the housing specialist. This is a very important tool when you think about a concept of starting a rapid rehousing program. The housing specialist concept or ideas are basically is to go out there and work with the landlords in obtaining housing for participants that you're serving. We found that when we brought the housing specialist aboard, that it was an easier concept in providing the services that our participants need. Additionally, we also employed a SOAR case manager that was able to provide services to the participants who did not have an income or was unable to become employed, was able to come into the program and retain some type of income without necessarily losing their housing or having that in order to maintain housing. One of the other important tools that we found that was important was being able to do double deposits. Although we had maintained some type of trust with our participants, with our landlords, being able to put down double deposit was a great asset, and able to convince those landlords and say, okay, I'll take a chance with some of the participants that you have. The other thing that we found out that we needed an end game. 30% of units, and we need to primarily work closely with our public housing authority to make sure that those families that came into our program maybe have a means of going into public housing, even though they had some issues in the past with the public housing system. So one of the things that we found out that we probably need to get better communication with our public housing authority in order to make those things come into fruition. In general, increase in family income was very small. Unfortunately, in the Northeast Florida section in Jacksonville we live, we're one of the most cost burdens communities in the state of Florida, primarily meaning that the cost of housing doesn't necessarily match with the source of income or the amount of income that the participants need. So what we found out with that we're going to eventually try to find some other methodologies and to solve that issue. We're experimenting with shared housing. We're talking about doing some other things within our this year's rapid rehousing program in order to address some of those issues. And the ones that didn't actually make it in the program, that kind of bounced out of the program or disappeared, usually those who had maybe a serious mental health issues or some addiction problems. We found that maybe those participants or those families that came into the program were better fitted for permanent supportive housing, which we identify as a gap for our community. So maybe within our next continuum care funding source, we'll probably try to go out and try more additional housing units for our for permanent supportive housing, because the families that we actually lost, most of them graded out when they came into, as far as the assessment tools go, to have been prime candidates for permanent supportive housing. Because we lacked those beds in our community, there was a chance that some of them may have returned to homelessness. Slide. Now we'll take some Q&A. And once again, I'm Will Evans. If you wish to email me with any questions, please feel to do so. Slide.
Thank you so much to you both. Sharon, do we have questions? I see one that's come in. How did your community begin coordinated entry?
This is Dawn. I'll start, and I should also add that Will is the chair of our coordinated entry committee, so I'm sure that he will also chime in. Will had been our champion for years about a coordinated entry system. In the 2013 NOFA, this was the year that HUD really signaled that they were not going to renew SSO projects unless they were directly connected to permanent supportive housing or to coordinated entry. We had one SSO project that actually was fairly old, but was originally written kind of as community-wide case management and coordinated entry before there really was a term for coordinated entry. So we were able, with HUD's permission, to repurpose that SSO to call it coordinated entry. It was really just a name change. That gave us the initial navigators. We have 5 navigators for 3 counties, so we're still understaffed on that side, but it did give us people who could do coordinated entry. We also have, through our HMIS funding for 1 staff person that does HMIS, but is also the facilitator for coordinated entry. So that's kind of the funding side of it. How we got the community buy-in side was meeting. Meeting and not meeting for forever, but making some quick decisions on what sort of tool we were going to use, how we were going to start, and how we were going to roll it out in its entirety. And Will, I don't know if you want to add to that.
Yeah, as Don mentioned, we kind of championed the calls for coordinated entry because what we wanted to see is something different in our community. As I mentioned before in the slide, that we wanted to stop going by managing homelessness and want to go through a quest of ending it. And I think one of the first concepts we took on was coordinated entry, because what we wanted to do is make sure that those who had the highest security of being homeless or had the many barriers of attaining housing would first be seen, and we did that through coordinated entry. So we started out basically putting together a committee, and that committee said, well, what do we want our coordinated entry to look like? So we set some standards up for ourselves. We talked to other communities, and we basically said, okay, this is right for our community. We set up standards. We got buy-in from our stakeholders, and then eventually we initiated. The good thing about coordinated entry for our community is that we have an ongoing standing committee that addresses just that, coordinated entry and improvement on it, and updating standards and making sure that it adheres to what the standards we want as far as ending homelessness in the Northeast Florida area.
Now, this is Dawn again. I will add, as you saw on that one slide, if your community has not started doing full-on coordinated entry yet, one of the things that does make people nervous, kind of freaks everybody out a bit, is you can really clearly see where your unmet needs are at that point. Like you see the gap between who is seeking housing services and who you're actually able to help and address. You also start to see what is the breakout between the lightest touch, rapid rehousing, and permanent supportive housing, and you can compare it to what do you have on your HIC? Do they match up? And that's where you as a community and as participants in the homeless services system have to start making some very tough choices on how do we make the changes that we need to end homelessness.
Great, thank you so much. Touching on something you just mentioned, we did get a question, what is the lightest touch? This person's from Michigan, but they're interested in learning more about rapid rehousing and what that means.
It's funny because we're an SSVF grantee, so I'm actually at an SSVF members meeting today too, and we're talking about lightest touch there. Lightest touch can be nothing other than, yes, you're in a crisis, and it can be, when Ian DeYoung talks about it with the VI SPDAT, it's maybe a no touch. You give them a shelter bed, but don't do anything for 14 to 21 days other than give them a safe place to stay, access to a computer and other resources to find a job and find housing. From the SSVF side, it could be we are providing case management, maybe housing search services, but no financial assistance. So these are people that probably have the least amount of barriers but for whatever reason, they are literally homeless. So we're trying to do what's the minimum they need to give them that bounce back to housing, back into stable housing, stable employment, so they don't come back and cycle back through our system again.
Right, and for the rapid rehousing portion of it, you know, we utilize it in our progressive engagement model that we basically give those that light touch as far as what they actually need in order to get into housing, and then provide services or provide that additional financial assistance as needed. So we provide a minimum amount that is needed in order for them to obtain and remain in housing, and then we assess and then provide additional financial assistance as needed, making sure that those wraparound services are part of the case management once they're in.
Great, thank you. Which assessment tool are you using for coordinated entry?
We're using the VI SPDAT.
Okay, thank you. We have a question about recruitment strategies. What landlord recruitment strategies are you able to effectively use to rapidly rehouse families with no income other than double deposit?
Well, one of the important things is that we do is developing a close relationship with our landlords. And what I found was when we had the pilot program is that instead of small things like instead of mailing the monthly checks to the landlord, we actually hand deliver them. We want our landlord to have a face-to-face, to know the housing specialist, to be able to communicate, to be able to touch, be able to talk to the person. And that goes a long way in developing a relationship with landlords, because once you get them to buy into the program, it will let other landlords know about it. And plus, additionally, with provide other folks in the community that are small landlords who have maybe 1 or 2 units within the community, and bringing them into the fold as well as allows us to be able to expand our landlord portfolio. But having that personal touch with them is very important. And even small things, like I said, instead of just delivering checks to them, instead of just mailing checks out to them, if you can deliver those checks with them, have a conversation with them, it goes a long way of increasing the landlord capacity.
Thank you. Somewhat related question. How long, and you may partially already answered this, how long of financial assistance and case management do you provide to individuals with no income?
But right now, the average length of time, because it's our first year and we're starting to go back and feed our numbers, for those who had any income, the average length of time was about 9 months around. Because what we found is that it takes about 2 or 3 months if they're a person that's eligible for SSI or SSDI to get them some source of income, or if they've been unemployed for a period of time, we try to work them in with our employment specialist to make sure that that the employment is not only, they attain employment, but being able to sustain that. So right now it's about 7 to 9 months for those who come in with no income, because usually those with no income are scoring the highest on the SPDAT and come in with more barriers.
And this is Dawn on the SSVF side, because it is a slightly different funding source. The average length of stay is lower because the length that you can actually stay within the program is shorter. But within our SSVF programs, we also take a pretty significant number of people who come in with zero income. Again, it's probably a 6 to 9 months average, even with zero income. As we all know, on the veteran side, we have greater access to permanent supportive housing through HUD-VASH. So sometimes that is a move that we make from rapid rehousing into VASH. But again, it's working with the employment specialists, getting people stabilized, maybe doing a step-down approach on how much rent the agency is paying versus the person, but also working on their strengths and letting them know that the assistance when the assistance will end, and reassessing, like Will said, as needed.
Thank you. Can you tell us about your strategy for determining what transitional housing to keep rather than reallocating to rapid rehousing?
Yeah, probably everyone's aware by now that that HUD released the Tier 2. We do have 2 transitional housing programs left. One is with the agency Will works for. One is another agency that has transitional housing. To be really transparent, the biggest determining factor is they are both located in buildings that are about 100 years old, and retrofitting them to anything else is incredibly expensive. These are long-term programs. They have served people for many, many, many years, but they are designed as semi-congregate living, and there's really no realistic way to transform them into permanent housing. With the Davis Center that you saw a picture of at the beginning of Will's, that straddled Tier 1, Tier 2, so we're still waiting for funding announcements on both of these. Davis Center under Will and his CEO's direction has made some really great strides in operating almost as more like bridge housing, which is another new term we seem to be hearing a lot more of, meaning this is a safe place for people to stay for a pretty short period of time on their way to permanent housing, meaning they're staying there more like average length of stay, maybe 6 to 9 months, not that traditional 24-month transitional housing. They also have been really great with providing a safe place for people who have experienced domestic violence, because it is a self-contained building with people on duty all the time. And they've also done a lot of work with our youth. They didn't have 100% in any one of those categories to bounce them up in this year's NOFA process. Our other transitional housing program has historically had a vocational component to it. It still does, and has served a lot of veterans. So I'll be really honest, it's a struggle. These are 2 really valuable programs in our community. They're providing services to groups of people who really need them. So we think they should be fully funded and funded through HUD. We are still waiting to see what HUD says.
Thank you. I think this is a question for both of you. What are some strategies you'd suggest for getting communities to trust in data to make decisions?
This is Dawn. We struggled so long with just really crappy, horrible data.
Yeah.
We actually, once we realized we could not fix what we had, we just went new. We went with a new system that we kept really clean. We changed our data standards for 24-hour entry into the system. We're checking it really regularly. As far as getting community buy-in, I think the more data you can share with your community, real data that can impact program managers, if they can have a better idea of what their people are doing, how their people are doing. Do they have a rock star on their team that they might not be aware of that has, an 87% success rate when everybody else is at 72? Through your HMIS systems, there's ways to get that information back out. And all the systems are getting more and more robust. With the new data standards, we're going to have to pull that out on a COC-wide level. My understanding is we're going to be able to pull that out on a programmatic level. So individual programs can see how they compare back to all of their peers as a whole. But I think
one thing that I would like to mention is that communities just have to decide, do you want to go by, just continue to manage homelessness, or do you really want to get into the concept of ending it? And that's one of the things that drove us is that we really brought up the idea that we wanted to end homelessness, and one major portion of doing that is basically rely on data. The data will show us where the gaps are, and it also will lead us in making those hard decisions that sometimes in the past that we was unable to make. Start there. Start with your data. Do an assessment of your community. Maybe bring in a third party to come in, and National Alliance does a very good job of doing that. Have someone come in and assess where you are as far as your programs go, and then decide what's best for your community.
And there's things that communities can do with even without, with a little bit of assistance. You can figure out. Will gave you how much it costs per household. I can tell you how much it costs per household for rapid rehousing. I can tell you for SSDF how much it costs per household, but I can also tell you how much it costs per successful outcome. So that's what we're looking at too. We all have really limited dollars. Can we make it go further if we switch interventions? And if we can, then it's our job to make that switch happen. If you look at the data and that is not the case, you would be an anomaly, but it is entirely possible that there is a community out there like that, that there are some, then it does make sense to prioritize a transitional housing program higher than rapid rehousing. But my guess is those are going to be pretty few and far between when you start looking at the cost per positive outcome per household and how many clients can be served in a year.
Thank you. Another question sort of along those lines is about agencies in the community or others in the community who are not embracing housing first, and how maybe your data or other tools that you're using to help change their minds.
Again, this is Dawn. I'll be really honest in that this last NOFA round was really rough. Even though I was not a person in the room making those decisions, because my agency also receives money through the continuum of care, putting 15% in Tier 2 was really hard. It was. With that said, I am knowing the criteria used, I'm really comfortable with the way that we're moving. A lot of it is just once you start moving forward and making those little steps, it's easier to continue down that path.
And I think embracing the housing first model, a lot of time it can, what I call myth busters, because with housing first, you admit folks without any barriers or any criteria. And one of the things in the past when we looked at criteria for entries, we used to say that people with no income was difficult to house. Well, in our past first year of running a rapid rehousing program under the housing first model, we kind of proved that to be wrong. So using the housing first model sometimes is a myth. Sometimes we create our own little ideologies that are not based on true facts or data. And if you just go ahead and embrace it, utilize it, and keep information or keep data on it, you probably, most folks come to realize that it actually worked.
Yeah, and I will add to that, as more and more communities move to a coordinated process of evaluation and entry, I will say the first major reallocation that we had in our community was an involuntary reallocation, and it was permanent supportive housing, and that was after a year into our 100,000 homes priority list, when we had one agency that for 12 consecutive months rejected every single person off the most vulnerable list to go into their permanent supportive housing programs. And quite frankly, when other providers see that, it makes them really, really angry. And they start to demand action because they're doing it. They're taking these clients, and for 85 to 95% of them, they're successful. So why the question starts to be, why aren't they? And if they aren't, why are we giving money to them?
Thank you. This is a question for Will. Could you tell us more about the staff training you described and who gave that training and the themes?
Okay. Yeah, well, one of the trainings that most of was actually done by me. But what I did was I actually attended a lot of training sessions and looked at a lot of webinars and actually read up a lot on progressive engagement. And what we did prior to even us getting funded for the rapid rehousing program, we started training staff a year in advance. Like I said, we trained on housing first model. We trained on progressive engagement. We trained on strength-based case management. So we did a lot of the training through active evaluation and attending webinars, which are very helpful, and talking to folks who are somewhat experts in that particular field, and got them to send me information. And we did the training for our staff prior to us even getting funded for the rapid rehousing program. This year, we're also looking to expand our training. We're looking into doing critical time intervention, client-centered practice, and also motivational interviewing. We may look to have a third party come in and do that training, but we're always looking to further our training with our case management, improve the program.
Thank you. And can you describe what a SOAR case manager is?
SOAR
Yeah.
case manager. Go ahead, now.
Yeah, I was going to say, almost every year there is a grant that is put out by SAMHSA that is actually a Train the Trainer grant. SOAR is a specific process to get Social Security disability insurance for people who are homeless and severely and persistently mentally ill. Will has one of the best SOAR case managers or SOAR processes in our processors in our community. So these are people who their entire job is getting eligible clients that mainstream benefit that they are eligible for. We have one, Will has one that's part of the Community Connections agency. We pay for one at one of our large shelters through the SSVF that's specifically for veterans. And there are two funded through an agency called Mental Health America that are kind of community-wide, meaning that anyone in the community can refer an eligible client to them. With the SOAR process, it takes about 40 hours per client. So you're looking at a case manager that's really only going to complete maybe 50 to 60 applications in a year, more than 50 if they're good and they're experienced at it. But the benefit is they have an incredibly high rate of getting SSDI for the clients. And they get it in a shorter amount of time than going through the normal process, and the yes rate is much higher. And well, I don't know if you want to add on just a specific SOAR case manager at Community Connections.
Yeah, and what Don mentioned is absolutely correct. And as I said beforehand, it's important, as you look at making sure that your participants are able to stabilize in housing and making sure that they get some type of income. And using a SOAR case manager or SOAR trainer is an important tool in that.
Thank you. We have a question about diversion and whether or not that's part of your system.
We funded through some state money a small diversion pilot in the last state fiscal year, and we have another pot of money to do it again for this fiscal year. Community Connections is one of the agencies that's going to participate in both years. We decided for this year one of the main entry points is actually going to be at one of our large shelters, which is the Sulzbacher Center. So we are actively learning diversion, but I would not say we're one of those communities that's really far along with diversion. But we're with everybody else on this one. We're trying to figure out exactly how do you do diversion and how do you do it well.
Exactly. I have to agree with Don. It's one of those things that we're kind of in the neophyte stages with, but we feel that it's an important tool in our arsenal to try to end homelessness. But we're kind of going through the process of learning more about it and implementing it into our services.
Thank you. Could you tell us a little bit more about the pilot project you discussed, Will?
Yes, I would love to. Yeah, we before we actually ended our transitional housing program, our scattered site transitional housing program, we actually was able to get a small rapid rehousing program. It was only funded for 6 families, and what we wanted to do was learn as much as possible we can through trial and error before we actually got and applied for the bigger project to try to put things in place and set up some standards. And primarily through that pilot program, we was able to write our own written standards that we kind of utilize not only for our particular program, but standards that we're using for the community as a whole. And we basically use trial and error, whatever, that's where we thought about the progressive engagement model. We said, well, what can we do? Will this actually work? So through that pilot program, we was able to initiate the policy and procedures and the written standards for our larger program.
Yeah, and the pilot program actually came even before we ever got awarded SSVF. So that pilot was incredibly valuable, not just in informing how, the COC funded, but all rapid rehousing within our community.
Thank you. Were you able to link those families that you discussed that bounced to PSH?
I'm sorry, repeat that?
The question is, were you able to link the families that you discussed that bounced from rapid rehousing to PSH?
Unfortunately, those families that left, only a small portion of them, they kind of disappeared on us. And we knew that they came in with a lot of barriers. And the ones that we couldn't save were one that were probably good candidates for permanent supportive housing, kind of abandoned the units, and we don't know where they went, unfortunately.
Yeah, we do have 2 small permanent supportive housing programs that were originally they came in under the first year that the HUD changed the definition of chronically homeless to include households with children. So we do have a little bit of capacity, but those programs tend to stay full. So that's why Will mentioned, one of our biggest challenges in our community is getting, we'll call it real buy-in from our housing authority. So we would have, so we can flow successful families out of those permanent supportive housing units and move these new families in. After they've been in rapid rehousing for 6 to 8 months, and Will and his team realize they're just not going to succeed in rapid rehousing. There's just more barriers than we knew about. We're trying to create that system-wide model where you can easily flow into permanent supportive housing with the supports necessary.
Thank you. What funding do you use to move from transitional housing to rapid rehousing?
From what? Transition? Yeah, it was all COC funding.
Funding, yes.
Thank you.
So it was,
and have you seen the length of stay changing with rapid rehousing?
Yes. It was nearly, yeah, almost cut in half as far as the length of stay between the transitional housing program, the scatter sites between and the rapid rehousing program. And a lot of times we didn't utilize progressive engagement when we had transitional housing, but a lot of folks, even though they were able or had the means of maintaining stability in the housing, there was a little apprehension about going into it because we used to say that, you can stay in transitional housing up to 2 years, and most families, whether they need it or not, decide to stay up to 2 years.
Thank you. Do you track the number of families, rapidly housed families, who then later need prevention services to remain stably housed?
We have not done
tracking.
That. Yeah, on Will's program, yes, but community-wide, yeah. We're starting to do that on SSVF. We actually did not have a whole lot. We did not open up our prevention really wide on SSVF. So that Will, I don't remember the. I'll let you talk about the percentages that do need some sort of assistance later.
Well, what we did, like I said, we just recently completed our first year with the larger rapid rehousing program. But what we did set in place was we have funding through the Moran Foundation that specifically is prevention. And what we found is that we kind of set up a plan B for those who are left rapid rehousing. They are eligible for prevention services through that Moran Foundation. If for some reason they find themselves in a type of crisis, short term, and basically primarily what we try to do is set it up for they would not have to return back into homelessness. So we give that information once they leave rapid rehousing and say if you do find yourself in some type of crisis and you need some short-term assistance, we do have a prevention program in place that you can utilize in order to actually have them ever go back into the homeless system.
Thank you. So one last question. Do you feel like you have tried something that hasn't worked, or is there something that makes you the most nervous?
Ooh, that's a good question. Well, right now, because we're just finishing our first year with our major rapid rehousing program, we're kind of learning now what things may have worked and what things actually work pretty well. So what I say is that give me about 3 months, and I'll be more than happy to volunteer to do another webinar and give you information as far as what has actually worked and some things that we have also implemented that we learned from after our first year of doing a major rapid rehousing program.
Yeah, and I would add on the CSC side, well, Will with his program did a great job in training his case managers on rapid rehousing. On the total COC side, we didn't do enough, meaning we didn't realize just how different rapid rehousing case management was from either permanent supportive housing or transitional housing. It's a very different mindset. So the one thing I would do is those different, all those different trainings that Will talked about, we've started to have them and opened them up to everybody within the coalition, and we're mandating or highly encouraging anyone who is a rapid rehousing case manager to go to those trainings.
Thank you so much. It's about time to wrap up. I just want to thank Dawn and Will for their great presentations and let everybody know that we have a few more webinars coming up. They're listed on the slide, but we'll also be posting them on the website. Thank you again to everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.